Today, we're getting into the formal complaint from Millie Bobby Brown against her Stranger Things co-star David Harbour, along with the surprising psychology of why our Halloween costumes say more than we think. Plus, we will be talking about the top astrology transit happening this week, that being the Scorpio New Moon, which will be most strongly felt by my fixed signs of Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. This is episode 2 of the Aligned Weekly podcast and series, your weekly mix of pop culture and world news with a sprinkle of what to expect in astrology so that your week feels informed and aligned. I'm your host, Alina Brown. And before we dive into it, hold on. Y'all, I have a soundboard and I'm about to be so annoying. We have to dive into this pop culture news. First up, what happens when a massive hit TV show announces a behind-the-scenes complaint and what it means for power, image, and culture? We're going to be diving into Millie Bobby Brown filing a formal complaint against David Harbour and the implications of that, because in my last episode, we were talking about the whole drama with the movie It Ends With Us and how there were formal complaints filed on set between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. And now we're seeing more private sort of complaints and filings of harassment also show up in another big profile production. But before we dive in, today's episode is supported by Auralign 2026 Astrology Planners. You already know I make these. This is my company. But the planner is one that puts 2026's top transits into the same place where you plan your weeks. More details later. With that said, let's dive into it. I'm going to be looking at my notes a little bit as I get acquainted to this flow, but welcome in, y'all. Let's get comfy. If you're going for a walk, hello. If you're on a commute, hi. If you are doing your chores, what it do? It's your bestie, Alina Brown. Let's dive into some of these news stories. So you guys, this one has all of the elements. It's fame, it's mentorship, it's a beloved hit show, and suddenly a formal internal complaint linking to the press. It's a reminder that whatever we see on screen often has a much messier behind the scenes story sometimes, which is pretty crazy. Millie Bobby Brown reportedly filed a formal harassment and bullying complaint against David Harbour ahead of the filming of season 5 of Stranger Things, triggering an internal investigation. And this is according to People and The Times. The leak and public airing of such a complaint challenges how production companies handle power dynamics, age gaps. Let's talk about Millie Bobby Brown. She's 21. David Harbour, I think, is 50 or pushing 50, and the glossy image of the cast family. And it's a cultural moment of accountability and vulnerability in a big budget show. I wanted to talk about this, and I think it's kind of relevant-ish because, one, have y'all noticed ever since COVID, the just ravenous hunger on social media for like finding and acquiring the worst possible things about people, like in general? But the other thing too is that, for one, I personally feel like in all working environments, there should always be a system where formal complaints should be filed, especially for harassment, if anybody feels uncomfortable, right? That's a given. I feel like most of us can agree on something like that. But I think the implications of this being a news story, what really worries me and upsets me personally, why I feel like, I want to talk about it, is what does this say about future people who have been harassed, who have been bullied, who have been victim to something? And especially if it's a higher profile show, but maybe not even a higher profile show, like just being in entertainment and having to fear it potentially getting leaked and impacting their career. Or in a very nuanced and murky water opinion, I'd love your opinion on this. You can comment this below. Let's say that you're in a dynamic with someone where they were bullying, harassing, or whatever, to the point that you need to file something and you need to make sure that things are in place to have there be safeguards, right? But you also don't want that person's career to be ruined. You also don't necessarily want their entire life to crumble. I don't know. Because what's essentially happening now is, because this was leaked, what's happening with David Harbour, I'm not trying to, empathize with him necessarily, because who knows what the scope of the harassment actually was. We probably will never truly know. But I don't know. There's just so many implications that come from this. So I just thought it was interesting. And then also, I just feel like it's also a reminder that the next time that you're impressed by a dream job, something that's glamorous, or when they say, oh, the cast was amazing, you always need to take stuff like that with a grain of salt, because it ultimately benefits the investors, the people who sell the show or the movie. It ultimately benefits the people at the top to constantly tell us, everybody on the set is a family. I love everybody here. Everything was amazing in roses and daisies. Yeah. Also, it's interesting to learn the sort of PR training that actors go through and how they're told. You need to always sing praises of all the people that you work with, because the industry is so collaborative. And if you say something bad about one person, there can be so many ripple effects. So, okay, now that we've gotten the first story out of the way, I want to do a mini check-in with y'all. A little update with me. So this video was recorded right after the first one. I decided to batch record the first two just to work around some work stuff that I have going on. As you see behind me, all of these planners. I make these planners, and right now is planner season. So things are pretty busy for me right now. It's also my mother's birthday coming up. So I just want to make sure that I have this done ahead of time. But something that I did recently, something I'm loving, is that there's a lot more musical artists that when they release an album, they have album release listening parties at record stores. And a part of it is to support record stores staying alive, like drawing more people back there, especially because there's been such an uptick over the last essentially decade of more people buying records. And I recently went with a friend of mine to a record store to listen to Hayley Williams' newest album. She had a release party there, and it was so sick, y'all. Like, it was really nice to be in, a store and not feel rushed, not feel weird about literally lingering, like literally being encouraged to linger during a listening party at a record store. Essentially, you're just moseying around, just snooping. Some people are literally just standing around and just pondering, listening to the album. Oh, and I'd love to hear, how has your week been? Go ahead and comment if you're watching this on YouTube, you can comment below. If you are listening to the audio form of this, in the show notes, you will have a link to my channel so you can leave a comment. But let's go ahead and move on to another interesting pop news sort of story. So tell me if this sounds familiar. You pick a Halloween costume and realize afterward that it said a lot about where your head's at. And here's the thing, shouldn't it? Don't you kind of want it to be? I would want it to be. But psychologists and cultural commentators are unpacking how our costume choices reflect identity shifts, aspirations, and collective anxieties. And because the themes we embody, themes being villains, icons, even memes, often mirror what we're processing culturally and emotionally, with that understanding, it can be very telling what we choose to wear. So I thought this was interesting because I was having an interesting conversation. I feel like this creates an even broader sort of discussion around what we choose to wear on a day-to-day basis, right? Because everything that we wear, it's a form of nonverbal communication to the world about ourselves. So for example, maybe you need to run over to CVS and you're like, I don't want to look disheveled, so I'm going to put on this and I'm going to do my hair in this way before I go. Pause and ask yourself, why do you not want to look disheveled? Long story short, my point is that this discussion of how our Halloween costumes reflect our inner psychology is really an interesting sort of microcosm of a broader reality, which is that what we wear every day is a reflection of our psychology, but also what we want to communicate to the world, either consciously or subconsciously. And yeah, I just find that to be very interesting. For example, this year I was Stack from Sinners, the movie Sinners. So I played a vampire. And to be completely transparent, if I pause to reflect on the maybe deeper rooted sort of psychology behind why I chose that outfit, all I can say is that I felt sexy. Okay. I felt confident. I felt like a badass. And over the last year or so, I have felt a lot more confident in my body and my appearance. And I guess maybe that's a reflection of that confidence. And I feel like Stack really reflects that. And I also really loved the allegories and the storyline within Sinners. With that said, I invite you to reflect on your last costume. What did you wear for Halloween? Comment that below. And what part of yourself were maybe you trying to express, hide, or explore? I would love to know. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the top transit for the week ahead, that being the Scorpio New Moon. This new moon will be happening in the fixed water sign of Scorpio, and it will be happening on November, no. Oh, it will be on November 20th. That, you see, you know what? That was a transition. That is all I can say about that. But on November 20th, we will be having a new moon in the sign of Scorpio, and let's do a little rundown about it. So first off, new moons only ever occur when the sun and moon form a conjunction in the same zodiac sign. So right now is Scorpio season. Happy Scorpio season to all of my Scorpio besties. It is your time to shine. I deeply appreciate you and your ability to dive deeper into the waters of emotions and what sometimes gets swept under the rug, the taboo, and the necessary vulnerability that comes with intimacy. Although I do know some Scorpios that they keep their heart a little closer to the vest, and I respect that as well. But even when they do, there's just a certain level of emotional maturity that I find so interesting with my Scorpios. So anyway, all of that to say, the signs that will feel this new moon more strongly will be my fixed signs of Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius, but all signs will be feeling it. And when we look to any new moon or full moon, we want to know what is the state of the ruling planet of the sign that the new moon is in. Now, the ruling planet of Scorpio is Mars in traditional astrology, and Mars is currently in the sign of Sagittarius. And with it being in Sagittarius, it's in this sign that has a lot to do with expanding our awareness, deepening our understanding of a specific topic. Think about deeper research, higher learning, exploring our philosophical, spiritual, and even political views. And Mars is the planet of aggression and war, but also passion, drive, energy, and motivation. And so with the new moon being in Scorpio, ruled by Mars, which is in Sagittarius, it's telling us that this new moon, signifying a new beginning in Scorpio, is signifying a new beginning as it pertains to Scorpio themes, that being a deeper level of emotional intelligence, a deeper dive into the waters, that being our deeper rooted conscious and subconscious motivations, as well as these Mars Sagittarius themes of a deeper understanding. This can mark a new beginning for many of us as it pertains to a deeper relationship, maybe a deepening of our relationship with a certain field of study, a certain topic. Think about things that you've learned online, for example, you've accumulated, maybe you've taken screenshots of them, and you finally sit down and you're like, "Ooh, I'm going to do a deep dive on this." I'm a Gemini stellium, so I love stuff like that. I'm like, yo, let me dive deeper into this. What is this about? Think about that, where you dive a little bit deeper into it. You finally get that book that dives deeper into that topic. These are the overarching themes happening around the time of this new moon. Now, on top of this new moon signifying the beginning of a new lunar cycle, it being in Scorpio, it's signifying a new lunar cycle and a new beginning for many of us as it pertains to our emotions, our emotional depths, our intimate relationships, the necessary vulnerability with those relationships. On top of that, we see that Venus, Lilith, the moon, and the sun will all be in Scorpio. And that means if you want to look at your personal natal chart and see what house is in the sign of Scorpio, all of these planets are currently transiting that house in your natal chart. That means that area of life is being activated. But all of that to say, that is what to expect for this new moon. In terms of do's and don'ts for this new moon, you do want to, if you feel like you have the capacity, you do want to rest and reflect. Take some time for yourself, run yourself a bath, take a nice shower and light a candle. Maybe grab your notebook and journal, but really call your energy back to yourself and reflect on your relationship with your deeper rooted emotions. You know, a lot of us as we get older, we can kind of like push down deeper rooted feelings because they're not really conducive to the status quo. They're not conducive to getting through your day, understandably so, in a society like ours. Maybe we feel, and you know, Scorpio is also the sign of the taboo, right? What's a taboo emotion? I have one: jealousy, envy. We don't like talking about that in our society. We don't like acknowledging those things. Loneliness, when was the last time you've ever heard somebody straight up say to one another, I've been feeling kind of lonely. It doesn't have to be those negative emotions. Maybe you're not feeling them. That's totally fine. I'm just saying that, reflecting on, one, how's my body feeling? Maybe something has been playing out in your mind over and over again. You've been ruminating, whatever. Pause and ask, how does my body feel about this? What's the feeling underneath this? Just checking in with your deeper rooted emotions. A lot of things can be illuminated for you around this time if you choose to do that. That can be through journaling. That can be through artistic expression in some way. Just being present with it and asking yourself, literally the other day, actually a good example of this, literally the other day, I had a conversation with myself in the car. I was just talking to myself. And I said out loud to myself, yeah, I've been feeling this. I've been feeling this recently. It's been coming up over and over again. And then I asked myself, why? Why do you think it's been coming up over and over again? And then I had an answer. I was like, well, because it has to do with this, this, and this. And then I asked myself, why do you think that's a result of those experiences? And then I said, well, in those experiences, I felt this and that. And then I asked myself, why? And why, until you get down to the root. And for me, a part of the root was, well, I had experiences when I was younger where I felt that feeling, and I've always been fearful of having that experience again. So now I ruminate worrying that it might happen again, but I'm realizing I've been projecting. And, that can literally come from regularly pausing to have conversations with ourselves. But oftentimes we don't really do that. We kind of go through life, we numb ourselves with our phones and distract ourselves. And it takes time to develop the habit to do that. So that's a do for the new moon. You can also do a new moon ritual or set a new moon intention. And this is why in all of my Auralign Astrology Planners that I design, annual astrology planners, there are dedicated new moon journaling sections for every single month of the entire year. So right where you plan your life, you can also reflect in alignment with lunar cycles, with the cosmic rhythm, with seasonal cycles as well. There's seasonal guides, there's monthly intention setting and reflecting. I'm really big on taking even little small moments to check in with ourselves, to get clear on okay, what was my overarching sort of intention for this season? Where am I at with that? Okay, anyway, I'm kind of going on a whole thing. A don't for this Scorpio new moon, especially because we see Venus and also Black Moon Lilith in Scorpio, is don't let your emotions carry you away, especially when it comes to your words, the words that you speak and your actions. In alignment with the Scorpio new moon, you don't want to ignore your feelings. You don't want to push things down necessarily, because that is where upset and the sort of intensification of pre-existing, even trauma can come from. It's just an emotional time right now. The moon rules over our emotions and our intuitive abilities. It's in a highly emotional and deep water sign of Scorpio, and it's conjunct Lilith and Venus. So there's a lot of relationship themes there too. Venus is the planet of relationship. So definitely if you're feeling a certain way, don't hesitate to lean into the new moon themes of rest and reflection before a new lunar cycle. Draw your energy back to yourself. Ask yourself, where's the source of this coming from? Maybe literally start therapy, go to therapy, talk to somebody, whatever outlet works for you, and process before reacting. Let's move on. Okay, before we get into the listener stories and the listener lounge segment, a quick pause for something that helps you actually use the astrology that we talked about here. That is the Auralign 2026 Astrology Planner, which currently we are doing a Black Friday sale on right now. So literally all of the bundle deals, all the pre-existing bundle deals, they're an even higher percentage off. Unfortunately, we need to skip this week's listener lounge, but in the show notes or video description, I will have the prompt for next week. And I would love if you either called in or commented in response so I can read them live in the next episode. But with all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. As always, the number one way to support my channel is to hit the subscribe button here on YouTube. If you're on a podcast platform, leaving a review on the Apple podcast reviews makes a huge difference as well. Liking the video, commenting, all that stuff. But with all of that said, I will leave you with my favorite quote, and that is, Be gentle with yourself, because life is about the journey, not the destination. All right, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.